Hello everyone. In today's video, I'm going to be canning nectarines. I'm Rebecca from StockingMyPantry.com. So I'm going to be using the instructions found in this book. It is the Ball Canning Back to Basics book, and I'll leave a link for it. It's a very basic recipe, and the good thing about this is that it's the exact same recipe as you would use for canning peaches. However, there is one difference that makes nectarines a good option, and that is that you have to peel peaches before canning. You do not have to peel nectarines, so that removes a step and makes it much easier. Now, one issue with nectarines or peaches is that they can discolor. They can kind of brown when you're after they're cut. And so I'm going to be using this Ball Fruit Fresh Produce Protection, okay? And it's really easy to use, and it will keep the peaches or the nectarines from discoloring. And from what people have said, it also kind of helps them to maintain a more vibrant color when they're canned. So let's go ahead and start by setting this up. I've already measured out the water and the produce protector. Basically, it's 1 tablespoon of the produce protector to 1 quart of water. I have 2 quarts of water in here, so I have 2 tablespoons of this fresh fruit protector. And I'm just going to sprinkle it in and then stir it to kind of dissolve it. It dissolves easily, so you don't have to do a whole lot. And by the way, I may be starting off with a bowl that's a little bit too small, but I always have you guys in mind, and I wanted to start off with this clear bowl so you can see what I'm doing, and if need be, I'll transfer everything into a bigger bowl. Okay, now for your preparing the nectarines or the peaches, there's a couple ways to do it. You're going to start off by just cutting it in half and removing the pit. And you can them just in halves like this. That totally works. Or you can cut them into slices. I'm going to actually go somewhere in between the two because I want to pack a little bit more into the jars and I want to make it easier to eat. But I don't want to take as much time as it would take to slice all of them. So instead of into halves, I'm just going to cut them into fourths. And then put them into the fresh fruit protector. I forgot to mention that the recipe calls for 5 pounds of firm ripe peaches or nectarines, and I have just a little over 5 pounds. So we'll see what we end up getting. And by the way, this is supposed to make 4-pint jars. I have 5-pint jars that I've heated that are in my canner just so that they'll stay hot. And so we'll see how much we end up with. Now you can see that this bowl is already getting pretty full, and I have this many nectarines to go, so I'd say I've done about half of them. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this, it's kind of like a colander and a ladle at the same time. Well, not really ladles, because ladles, anyway, I don't know what you call this thing, but if I can, I'll leave a link to one that's at least similar to this. But what I'm going to do, because these have already been coated with the water, and so I'm just going to kind of not completely drain them out because they'll still have some of the water that's been treated that has some of the fruit protector in it, the produce protector. And so I'm just going to move them into the other bowl and then continue the process. Because the bottom line is these are covered with that produce protector solution already. All right, and now I'm going to go ahead and continue doing this, and I'll bring you back when I have them all done. Now that the nectarines are prepared, I'm going to make a simple syrup to put on them. And this book recommends 3 cups of light or medium syrup for canning fruit. And It refers you to page 98. On page 98, the syrup recipe makes about double that, so I've done about a half of a recipe. If you wanted to do 6½ cups for light syrup, and that's what I'm going for, is the light syrup, you would use 2¼ cups of sugar and 5¼ cups of water. So I have already in my pot here about I ended up putting 2½ would be 5, so I put 2¾ cups of water in here, and I'm going to pour in 1 heaping cup of sugar. And let's hope this works. I'm not used to using an induction burner, but this is the only thing that I have available here. So if this doesn't work, I'll bring this over to the stove and I'll tell you, I'm just going to read the instructions to you. So basically all that I need to do is I just need to bring it to a simmer, and really the only thing we're wanting to do is we're wanting to heat up the water and dissolve the sugar. So that's really all that we have to do. Once this comes to a simmer and the sugar's dissolved, I'm going to put a lid on it and put it aside. So it looks like this isn't wanting to work. I'm thinking this pot is maybe a little too big for this burner. I've tried it before and it worked, but who knows? Probably because I'm making a video, it's not going to work. So I'm going to run over to the stove. I'm going to prepare the syrup, and again, I'm just going to bring it to a simmer until the sugar dissolves, and then I'll put a lid on it so it will stay hot while I move on to the next step. I'll be right back. You can see there's still a little bit of sugar down at the bottom, but it's almost all dissolved. Okay, we have a simmer going, so I'm going to go ahead and remove it from the stove. So one thing I forgot to mention earlier when I first started this is that I'm going to use a little different method with canning. This is water bath, but I'm going to do a low pressure setting, and so be sure to watch through the end so you can see that part. Okay, now I've taken my jars out of the canner. The canner is hot. I am doing the raw pack method, so I don't want it overly hot, so I'm going to leave the lid open just a bit while I go ahead and fill my jars with the nectarines. Now this calls for a 1/2 inch headspace, okay, and a lot of people do recommend you leave slightly more headspace when you're using the Nesco, so we're going to give that a try, but basically it'll be about a 1/2 inch headspace. So use my trusty funnel, and what I did is I put these nectarines into this bigger bowl, and I did dump the solution into it, and so I am still using the slotted spoon. Okay, a part of me is thinking that maybe I should have gone ahead and done slices, because you can see that it's a little bit of a struggle getting them into the jars. I'm just going to use my hands and pack them down as best I can. But I can tell that I'm going to have more peaches than I need, or more nectarines than I need for the 5 pints. So what I may do is, it's off camera, I may end up just making more syrup and doing a second batch of these, because I have way more than I need. Okay, so I think I'm going to get 2 cannerfuls out of this. I'm going to fill these as full as I can without overcrowding them. You know what I'm going to do? I am not liking how these are fitting in. I could very carefully place them. You know, I think I'm going to end up cutting each of these into a half again and then put them back in. So I'm dumping them back in the fruit protector. I was kind of hoping to avoid the extra work of that. But this is just an example of how sometimes you have to pivot a little bit and make a little change when you're in the middle of doing something. And I'll be able to get a lot more in. And by the way, since I still have the bowl with the fruit protector, I'm just making sure to dip in the piece as I'm cutting it. Okay, I think I'm going to end up with getting more in this way. Okay, I'm going to bring you guys back when I get all of these, the rest of these cut up smaller and placed into the jars. And I think I'm still going to have more than what I need. So, okay, as you guys can see, I have a ton of nectarines left. So I haven't decided yet if I'm going to run a second canner load of these or if I'll just put some in our smoothie this morning and then freeze the rest, or what I'm going to do. But I will figure it out. And so anyway, now let's go ahead and move on to the next step, which is adding in the syrup. Okay, so I've got the syrup here. Okay, so a part of me thinks I'm going to regret following the instructions with the amount of syrup that I made. Hopefully with the peaches being in there, or the nectarines rather, I'm not going to need a ton, but I'm concerned I'm not going to have as much of the syrup as I need. But if that happens, what I'll end up doing is I'll just add in a little bit of hot water to bring it up to the appropriate headspace. Some I might have overdone a little bit. We'll see once I debubble. Ooh, I got a little carried away with that one. I wasn't watching what I was doing. Okay, so I was wrong. I'm going to have plenty of syrup, it looks like, for this amount of jars, which is pretty good considering that I have 5 and the recipe only calls for 4 pints. So I'm going to go ahead and debubble and then adjust the liquid in the jars. Okay, I'm using this handy dandy headspace tool. This is a 1/2 inch. And that looks good. Let me debubble. Okay, now at first it seemed like that one wasn't going to work, but now that I've debubbled, it's got the 1/2 inch headspace, which is perfect. Okay, now I'm happy with the headspace on all of them, and needless to say, I've made quite a mess as I've been putting things in. Even if I hadn't made a mess, it's always a good idea to wipe the rims. So I'm going to do that, and then I'll get the lids on and get it into the canner and show you an alternative method for water bath recipes in the Nesco canner. Okay, we're going to get the lids on fingertip tight. Okay, now we're going to put these into the canner. Now typically with water bath canning in the Nesco or any water bath canning, you cover the lids with at least 1 inch of water. I am going to be using the low pressure setting on the Nesco, which is an alternate way to water bath can in the Nesco. So first, let me go ahead and plug this in. You press the low pressure and then you put in 25 minutes. Switch the valve to the exhaust position, and then you press start. Now, the nice thing about using the low setting instead of the water bath setting is that you do not have to adapt for altitude. So I'll bring you back when they're all done so you can see the finished product. Okay, so I wanted to share with you guys what happened is I ended up with 3 extra pints. So you guys saw how much I had left, and I decided to go ahead and can them as well. But I thought it would be a great idea to run an experiment and check how much time it took to use the low setting versus the water bath setting. So in the one canner, I have 2 Nescos. So in the one, I used the low setting as I demonstrated, and then I made more syrup, and I went ahead and put 3 pints into my other Nesco, and I used the water bath setting in that. And what really surprised me is that they both ended up finishing at the same time. I expected using the low setting instead of the water bath setting to save time and for it to be faster. And actually, when it comes right down to it, since they finished at around the same time, the water bath was actually a little faster than using the low setting. So because I had to, make the syrup and fill the jars and get the canner ready and all of that, and yet they still finished at about the same time. And the reason for that is when you use the low setting, after it finishes processing, you have to let it come down pressure naturally, just like you do with regular pressure canning. Now with the low setting, it doesn't take as long for it to come down off of pressure, but it does take time. And so that really surprised me. So a couple of other things surprised me with this project. One is that there was a ton of siphoning, and actually not just siphoning, but everything kind of just shrunk down. And so afterwards, I did a little bit of research, and I found that this likely occurred, the shrinking of the contents, because I used the cold pack or the raw pack method instead of the hot pack method. So in the future, I plan to, if I'm going to do peaches or nectarines, do the hot pack method. And actually, let me just grab the book and I'll read to you what it says about the hot pack method. So, because I do think the end product will be better with the hot pack method. Okay, so for hot pack, it says, bring the syrup to a simmer in a 6-quart stainless steel or enamel Dutch oven. Simmer the fruit halves 1 layer at a time in the syrup until thoroughly heated. And then you pack them into the jars in the same way that you would otherwise. Also, I wanted to mention that the ball books say to put them in 1 layer at a time, the peaches 1 layer at a time. The National Center for Home Food Preservation says you can put them all in the pot at once. So that's really up to you. I think it'd be easier to put them all in the pot at once. But the bottom line is you put them in the hot syrup and simmer for a minute before packing the jars. So another advantage of doing the hot packing is that you process for 5 minutes less. So it says process 1 pint jars for 20 minutes or 1 quart jars for 25 minutes, adjusting for altitude. So with the raw pack, you process a pint jar for 25 minutes, a quart for 30 minutes. With the hot pack, you process 1 pint jars for 20 minutes and 1 quart jars for 25 minutes. So that's another advantage. But I definitely think the end product would be better if I had hot packed instead of raw packed. These are still perfectly fine to eat. There's nothing wrong with them. I did open up a jar and ate some yesterday, and they taste great. And as long as they stay sealed, they'll be fine. So, but just the end product I think will be better if next time I hot pack. So that's what I recommend. So I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, I would really appreciate it if you would like the video. And if you haven't already done so, if you would subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day.